That bird at your feeder this morning just survived something you slept through. You may have seen it arrive, the cardinal dropping in at first light, wings settling, already working the seed before the yard was fully awake. You probably didn't think much of it. Birds come to feeders, that's what they do. But that bird wasn't simply showing up. It was finishing something. 12 hours of darkness it had to manage down to the last calorie, monitoring for predators with half a brain while the other half slept, burning stored fat at a rate precise enough that researchers can measure what the night cost it, in a location it had assessed and chosen and committed to before the sun went down. Ornithologists who study avian sleep describe the experience of understanding it as one of the most humbling in behavioral science. A bird that weighs less than a handful of coins maintains its body temperature, processes the spatial memories it will need tomorrow, keeps itself alive against the cold, and stays alert to threats, all simultaneously, all night, all while appearing to simply be asleep. The morning feeder arrival is not a bird starting its day. It is a bird completing one of the most demanding 12-hour cycles in the animal world, and it completed it in your yard. On purpose. Welcome to Bird's Mind. We're going into the night, backward from this morning. What your birds did while you slept, what it cost them, and what it means that they chose your yard to do it in. Stay to the end. By the time we come back to that cardinal at the feeder, you will not be looking at the same thing. Most people see the morning feeder arrival and think, the bird is hungry. That is not what is happening. By the time that cardinal lands at your feeder, it has already been working for 12 hours. Not resting, not waiting, working. Burning stored fat at a rate precise enough that researchers can measure what the night cost it down to a fraction of its body weight. Max Planck Institute studies on wild bird overnight energetics found that small songbirds in winter arrive at dawn with fat reserves reduced by up to 8% of their body weight from the evening before. Fat burned for one purpose, to keep a body that weighs less than a handful of coins warm enough to survive until morning. The cardinal at your feeder is not early. It is on time. It arrived at the precise moment its reserves required it to, the threshold where foraging stops being a preference and becomes the only available option. And it came here, not the yard 2 houses down, not the park 3 streets over. This feeder, the one it had already mapped and assessed and filed away before the sun went down last night. The bird is not simply hungry. It is completing something, and we're going to go back to where that something started. There is a window of about 30 minutes before full dark when something changes in the yard. You may have felt it without knowing what it was. A specific quality of quiet, not empty, but held. The kind that makes you stop and look around without being sure what you're looking for. The birds are still there, but they have shifted modes. In those last minutes of usable light, the cardinal at your feeder is not feeding casually. It is loading, building the fat reserves that will have to last 12 hours. When it has taken what it can, it moves. Not randomly, but to a mid-level perch, a specific height between the ground and the canopy. From there it calls. Not the territorial song of the day, something shorter, lower. A position check. A way of saying, I am here, where are you? University of Bristol researchers studying pre-roost behavior in North American and European songbirds found this sequence is consistent within species, the same steps, in the same order, every single evening. After the call, a final scan, slow, deliberate, then the roost site. Feathers up, head rotated slightly back, one leg pulled in. That cardinal performed every one of those steps near your yard last night, at the hour you were making dinner. The bird did not end up in your yard last night by accident. Before it committed to that shrub, that nest box, that branch at the edge of your fence line, it ran an assessment. It approached from a distance, stopping at intermediate perches to scan. It tested the cover from multiple angles. It listened. Not passively, actively, the way an animal listens when the wrong sound means it doesn't wake up. The criteria are specific: proximity to reliable food, quality of cover, predator exposure, and the behavior of any disturbing stimuli in the immediate environment. Cornell Lab of Ornithology research on winter roost site selection documents that birds maintain preferred sites, returning to the same locations night after night, chosen on exactly the same criteria they use to evaluate foraging ground. Disturbing stimuli includes humans. Your lights coming on at 9 p.m., the sound of your back door, the dog let out at 10, the car in the driveway. All of it was in the assessment. All of it was weighed. And the bird chose to stay. A feeder visit is easy trust. Sleeping somewhere is a different category entirely. What your yard earned last night wasn't a customer. It was a vote of confidence from an animal that cannot afford to be wrong. Somewhere within a few hundred feet of your yard, there is a hole in a dead tree that you have almost certainly walked past without noticing. It is not large, smaller than you'd expect, tight enough that the bird has to angle in. It faces away from the prevailing wind. The entrance is positioned so nothing can approach from above without the occupant having a clear line to hear it. This was not luck. Every one of those features was chosen. Most people know that woodpeckers nest in cavities. What most people don't know is that the roost cavity is a completely separate structure. Different tree, different dimensions, different purpose. The nesting hole is for raising young. The roost cavity is for surviving winter. Cornell lab research on downy woodpecker winter behavior found that individual birds excavate dedicated roost cavities each autumn and maintain them through the cold months, testing them before each night's use, sometimes rotating between 2 or 3. It is, in the most literal sense, a private room. If a downy woodpecker has been visiting your feeder, it has been sleeping somewhere specific and returning there every night. Your feeder is what keeps it fed. That cavity is what keeps it alive. They are not the same thing, and the bird knows the difference. The night is not a pause. For a small bird, it is the hardest part of the day. Enter it with too little fat, and you don't reach morning. Burn through your reserves too fast, generating heat against a January night, and you arrive at dawn too depleted to compete for the feeder you flew toward. The margin between those two outcomes is not wide. Max Planck Institute researchers measuring overnight energy costs in wild songbirds found that small birds arrive at dawn with fat reserves reduced by up to 8% of their body weight. Every fraction of that was burned for one purpose: keeping a body warm enough to still be alive when the light came back. The strategies differ. Cavity roosters use the wood walls around them. Insulation the open air cannot provide. Open roosting species use something more precise: a controlled drop in body temperature, just enough to reduce metabolic demand without crossing into a drop they cannot recover from. Regulated hypothermia, a threshold the bird walks every single night. Both strategies work. Neither has margin for error. Every bird at your feeder this morning ran that calculation successfully. Some birds that were at your feeder yesterday did not come back today. You may not have noticed, but there is a reason, and the night is it. Last night, while the bird in your yard slept, part of its brain did not. This is not a metaphor. Many bird species practice what researchers call unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. One hemisphere of the brain enters deep rest while the other stays active. The eye connected to the alert hemisphere remains partially open. The bird is, in the most literal sense, simultaneously asleep and watching. When threat level is low, both hemispheres may rest. When threat level is elevated, exposed perch, unfamiliar sight, cats moving through the dark, one half stays on. Research on roosting groups found that birds at the perimeter with higher predator exposure spend significantly more time in this split-brain vigilance than birds sheltered at the center. The same calculus governs individual roost site selection. The depth of sleep a bird achieves in a given location is a direct readout of how safe it assessed that location to be, which means something specific about your yard. A bird that slept deeply there gave it a high rating. A bird that kept one eye open did not. The rating was earned by your yard's cover, its noise level after dark, its predator pressure, and the behavior of the human who left the porch light on at 11. You were part of the assessment. You didn't know it. The bird noticed. Sleep, for a bird, is not downtime. While the cardinal sat motionless in the holly bush last night, its brain was working through the day, not randomly, but systematically. Birds cycle through sleep stages that include a form of REM, functionally similar to what mammals experience. And in mammals, REM is when the day gets filed. Experiences sorted, spatial information encoded, routes and locations consolidated into the memory systems that will be needed tomorrow. Research at MIT and the University of Chicago documented this in zebra finches with unusual precision. The neural patterns associated with singing a specific song were replicated in the sleeping bird's brain during REM, the bird rehearsing, note by note, while unconscious. The hippocampal structures responsible for spatial memory in birds, proportionally larger in species with complex spatial demands, show the same activity during sleep. The bird in your yard was not simply resting last night, it was processing your yard. The feeder position, the gap in the shrubs it uses as a flight line, the cache site near the fence post, the human whose movements it has learned to read. Your yard is in that bird's memory right now. The version encoded last night is the version it will act on this morning. What it finds when it arrives will either confirm what it remembered or begin to revise it. The yard you thought went silent last night did not go silent. It went dark. Those are different things. Above your roof, through the hours you were asleep, birds were moving. Migrants navigating by starlight and magnetic field, passing over suburbs they will never land in, producing thin, high-contact calls as they go. Position notes, species-specific, gone in a fraction of a second. Birdcast researchers and citizen science monitoring networks have documented that nocturnal flight call recording is one of the most sensitive tools available for tracking migration in real time. Individual species identifiable by call alone, in the dark, at altitude. Below them, in your yard, the roosting birds were listening. That half-awake hemisphere we talked about, it is tuned to exactly this, classifying sounds as they arrive. Familiar, ignore. Unfamiliar, assess. Wrong pitch, wrong rhythm, wrong interval. Full alert, in fractions of a second. An owl calling 2 yards over is information. A cat moving through the leaf litter is information. A migrant passing at 2 in the morning is information. If you've ever been pulled out of sleep by a single clean note from somewhere outside your window and couldn't identify it, that was most likely a bird. A migrant that passed through. Or a roosting bird that heard something it didn't like and said so. The yard was still in conversation. You just weren't invited. We started this morning. At the feeder. The cardinal dropping in from the direction of the roofline, wings still settling, the yard quiet behind it. Now you know what that moment cost. It ran the pre-roost sequence the evening before. The feeding, the perch, the call, the scan. It assessed your yard at its most unpredictable hours and decided the risk was acceptable. It found its roost and entered the night with whatever reserves it had built, then spent 12 hours burning them down to the margin. Not too fast, not too slow, while half its brain stayed on watch, and the other half processed the map of your yard it will need today. It heard the owl 2 properties over. It felt the temperature drop. It held on, and when the light came back, it came here. Every piece of research in this video points to the same place. Overnight survival for a small bird is precise, unforgiving, and entirely invisible to the human who left the feeder out and went to bed. It resolves every morning in a moment most people don't even stop for. That cardinal chose your yard to survive in, not as a convenience, as a conclusion, drawn from everything it observed about this place and the person who tends it. You are in that bird's file, marked known, marked predictable, marked safe. It keeps coming back because it keeps reaching that same conclusion. And now, finally, you know what it took to get there.